Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we are going frog fishing. Brought you guys out here with me for an evening session on Clear Lake. We're going to talk about some tips, some tricks, some different ways of throwing the frog that will make a big difference for you as you go through summer. You can catch these frog fish. It's not that difficult, but there are some little tweaks and tricks that make it a lot easier. Now you guys know that Tim and I love throwing frogs. That's no secret. We do a lot of frog videos every year. It's one of our favorite topics. It's also one of our favorite ways to fish. You're gonna find a frog on the deck of my boat about 10 months out of the year. If I think I can get away with it, I am frogging over everything else. Not because I'm necessarily going to catch the biggest fish on a given day, but because it's really, really fun. There's something about that pure power fishing, that straight braid, stiff rod, hard hook sets, bass in the cover. It's just exciting. So I go out of my way to throw a frog any chance that I get. But there are some things that we do that are a little bit different than the average angler that I think make a big difference for us. So I thought tonight, I was going out to throw a frog anyway, I thought I'd bring you guys along with me and talk about a handful of those little things that you can do. You know, it's not a secret, Tim and I's favorite frog is that Bullywah 2. The little Allen color is our main color. Then this white one right here, the one I'm throwing right now, and I'm throwing this one tonight because our water here is clearer than normal. Quite a bit clearer than normal. And to these fish that are used to living in that murky water, it's crystal clear to them. So I went with a white instead of that Boulder chartreuse color that I often throw. But probably the biggest thing I can tell you about frogging is that you want to get comfortable walking the frog. Now, if you're fishing it on top of mats, on top of heavy vegetation, it's not even an option. You can't walk a frog on top of that stuff. On that stuff, we just throw the frog out and essentially just kind of bump it along, stop and go, so that the fish have time to track it. That's all you're trying to do there. But one of the biggest things that you can do with a frog this year, if you want to be different, if you want to get more bites, if you want to get bigger bites, is to get out from under that cover. Start throwing your frog in open water. You can see we're on the edge of this tule line or reed line or whatever you want to call them. Buggy whips, reeds, tules, cattails. There's a lot of different tules around the country, but I love to frog on these tule lines. There's a lot of cover there behind me, but the fish themselves, they're sitting out in front. I'm actually fishing totally open water. No grass, no weeds, nothing. But I'm drawing those fish out away from that cover and getting them to bite. Now, why throw a frog instead of, say, a popper or a spook or any other topwater bait? Why would I throw a frog in open water? Why would I recommend you do the same? Well, it's simple. There are two reasons. One, it's different, and different is a big deal. The other people on your lake are probably not doing it. They're probably throwing a walking bait or a popper, and the fish get used to those profiles. They get used to seeing that stuff. If you're doing something different, you will get more bites. Now, frogs traditionally have a poor hookup ratio. And that's going to be the argument. Why would you throw a bait with a terrible hookup ratio when you don't have to? And the reason why is that my frogs do not have a terrible hookup ratio. They have an excellent hookup ratio. We've spent a lot of time figuring out which frogs to throw and how to modify them. We throw a handful of frogs. We throw the Bullywah, Spittin' Wah, Snag-Proof Bobby's Perfect Frog, Jackal Gavacho. There's a handful of others, but we throw these frogs that have excellent hookup ratios, the coppers, especially after we modify the hooks. Bend them up, bend them out. And we've done entire videos on that. So I'm not going to go into the specifics of those modifications, but of course, you know, you could search TacticalBassin frog modifications, and I'm sure those videos are all gonna pop right up for you. But once you adapt your frog a little bit and get proper equipment, your hookup ratio is excellent. So that eliminates that entire thing. It's a non-issue. Now you're just throwing a frog that's different than everybody else. Makes all the difference. You're going to get more bites. You're going to get big bites, because big fish are the ones that get wary first, not little fish. The big ones are the ones that decide not to take that shot at that popper anymore, not to run down that spook because they saw one yesterday. The little ones, a lot of times they'll still do it. It almost gives you a false confidence to keep going. Now, the second reason for the frog is that if I make a mistake and I cast too far, like I just did, and end up way back in the junk, my cast isn't ruined. I can pull that frog right on out of that stuff. And sometimes I get bonus bites way back in there. So there's a huge added bonus there as well. Well, there's really good grass on this corner up here ahead. Really would have thought I would have got bit in this pocket. Come on, fish. We're a little early in the evening, but we're gonna keep trying. Now, that's number one. Get in open water, get that frog walking. Now, walking a frog, oh, I just had a little boil. Just barely came up and touched the back of that frog. Come on, fish, come back. So that's number one. Number two, the second biggest tip, well, we've talked about walking. We haven't talked about the specifics of walking yet. The specifics of walking a frog, if you don't know how to do it, they're not what you think. Walking a frog is just as finessey as drop shotting properly. It's a very finesse touch. And you wouldn't expect that because frogging is all power. But the actual walking portion is just a little tiny touch of the rod tip. I tell clients every day, if you can't get a frog to walk, you are over walking it. You're pulling too hard. You're either pulling too hard with the rod when you're twitching, or you're taking up too much line with the reel. A lot of times, guys will be walking, but they'll just be reeling with the other hand. You can't do that. The other hand has to have a chop, a very consistent stop and go. That's what allows the nose of that frog to come back and forth. If you're steadily reeling, you're constantly pulling it back to center and it won't walk for you. So any time that a frog won't walk, you're pulling too hard on it. So either make sure that you're chopping or just barely touch that rod tip. It doesn't take a hard walk like a spook or other topwater to walk a frog. It takes a very soft hand to do it. And then you have to transition from that to a really hard hook set, which can be a little complicated, but you can do it. Boy, we are not getting bit right here. I thought we were gonna be in the money on this spot. Try back here in the back. Now, number two. We've already tried to move on to number two a couple of times. We're finally there. Number two tip that I can give you for frogging is to make sure that you've got the right rod for the job and the right frog for the job. Now, I'm about to break that down, and it's not the advice that you think I'm about to give you. I discovered a couple years ago, fishing with one of my nephews, that he could not put the hook in a frogfish. He couldn't do it. He was using my rods. I use a 7.3 extra heavy. He was using my rods. They're perfect frog rods. He couldn't get a hook in them. And I mean, he couldn't, it wasn't like he was hooking them, getting them halfway to the boat and they were coming off. He just flat couldn't hook them up. He'd hit them and start to load and they'd come off. Over and over and over again. He was miserable and he didn't want to do it anymore. So we went back out the next morning and I brought him a rod that I thought was way too soft for throwing a frog. But I also brought him a smaller frog with a smaller hook. So we had been throwing bullywahs on a 7.3 extra heavy. That's my standard gig. Instead, I brought him a snag-proof Bobby's Perfect. I brought him this frog. Let me bring up my bullywah. Oh, there's some bait popping up here. So, snag-proof next to a bullywah. Very similar profile, but the snag-proof is a lot softer, and it's got a much smaller hook than a bullywah. Much thinner wire. In other words, it's easier to set. When I put him on that softer rod with a softer frog, lo and behold, he got almost 3/4 of his fish in the boat that first morning. What it turned out to be was that with that stiff rod, he'd go to hook set on him, and as soon as he'd get to the fish, he didn't have enough power to actually drive the hooks. The fish would essentially stop him, and that was the end of the hook set, and then they'd come right off. With that softer rod, he'd load up, and he was deeper into the set when that rod finally started to bow up, and he could finish his hook set. He would bury that hook. So the point here, as I'm rambling on, is that if you're struggling with frogging, it's not the frogging. That's not the problem. And you are not the problem. It's that everybody is different. Now the average guy, average normal big guy, 7.3 extra heavy is gold. All the way up to a 7.5 or 7.6 extra heavy, or even a heavy, you're good to go. But if that is a struggle, oh, right there, he came for it right as I lifted it away. Come back, come back. If you're struggling for that hook set, the number one thing you can do is go to a softer rod. See if it makes a difference. Now don't go too soft. Don't go dropping all the way down to a crankbait rod or something, and then you load that rod all the way up and you can't get the hooks in them and they come up and jump off. You don't want that either. You need to be in the middle. I'm talking about a jig rod. Texas sig rod, jig rod, and go to a little bit lighter braid when you do that. That makes a huge difference too. We're throwing 65-pound braid because we're hooking big fish, and we're hooking them in thick cover a lot of times. I might hook them in the open, but they'll run right into that junk, and then I've got to horse them back out. So we're throwing 65-pound braid, but if you're going to that softer rod, drop down to 50-pound braid. That still sounds really heavy if you're not a frog guy, but if you're a frog guy, you know 50-pound is nothing. That is thin line. 50-pound will get you more bites, and because you are fishing that softer rod, it's going to be a great shock absorber for you. You're not going to have any issues. You will get more bites than a guy throwing 65, and because you've gone softer, you're not going to have the break-offs. It will make a big difference. Now, if you go burying that thing in super thick cover, or you do hook a monster, you may end up with a little situation on your hands. But you got to hook them before you can lose them. So don't worry about that. All right, we're switching frogs. I'm going to give you a prime example. Here we go. We're dropping down to a 7.2 heavy, 50-pound. This is the little baby bullywah. We normally throw the 65. This is the little one. Way, way, way smaller. Because I'm having a heck of a time getting bit here while I talk to you guys. The other frogs that I have tied on here, I've got a gavacho, which is a smaller poppin frog that I really like. I've got a teckle, and then I've also got the big spittin' wah. But if we can't get bit on this little tiny stuff, we're probably never going to get around to the big stuff. So that kind of wraps up topic number 2. Although we haven't talked about the specifics. So I talked about that snag-proof Bobby's Perfect. This bullywah is the second one, this little tiny bullywah. I mean, this hook, you can get away with this on a jig rod all day long. You are not going to have a problem. In fact, if you threw that on a 7.3 extra heavy and hooked a true monster, you might even bend that hook. So that heavy 7-foot-ish rod is going to make a big difference for you getting those fish in the boat. Same with that gavacho. You can throw the gavacho either way. You can get away with it on a little lighter rod because it has a smaller hook, but it's still a heavy wire hook, so I still get away with throwing it on that big stout gear too. That's a really nice crossover frog. And it's a Poppin Frog, which is a big deal too. We walk our frogs. We've already covered that. Tim and I love to walk a frog. We get way, way more bites walking than anything else. Even when we throw popping frogs, we tend to walk our popping frogs. We don't tend to pop them. The nice thing about a popping frog is that when you walk it, it displaces more water, creates a bigger movement, a bigger commotion, will draw fish from farther than a standard frog when you walk it. Has nothing to do with the actual popping action. That said, there's a time and a place for popping a frog, no doubt. Especially when the shad are up spawning, a low light when you're trying to get fish's attention. If you've got murky water, that popping action will help pull those fish for you. That brings us to tip number 3. Tip number 3, and we are on tip number 3 without a fish. What is happening tonight? My goodness. If I don't get bit before this is over, I don't actually care, and we're gonna run this video anyway, and you are going to see it. But Lordy, I would like to catch some fish while we're here talking tonight. Jeez. Oh. And I dumped him. Did you see that rod come out up through here? What kind of hook set was that? That was ugly. My goodness, that was ugly. On that note, I think we're gonna change frogs. This is that gavacho. Let's give him a try. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. It's kind of an awkward little space here between where I want to set the hook and the camera. I'm afraid to lop your head off over here. But even so, that was bad. It was only about a 3-pounder. I'm not heartbroken, but wouldn't it have been nice to catch one together? Jeez. Tip number 3. Let's get back on track. Tip number 3 this summer is to throw a different frog. Don't get caught up throwing the same frog that everybody else is throwing. Now, if you're on a body of water where you're the only guy doing it, nix that. And if you're getting lots of bites, nix that. Got him. All right. Thank you, my friend. You think you wanted that gavacho? Awesome. Thank you, buddy. There's that gavacho. Again, different profile. Not a frog I see thrown out here on Clear Lake very often, but it's one that we really like. Little bluegill color, different look, 3 tails instead of 1. Now we're gonna set that down, keep on moving, but I haven't forgotten our place. We're going back to the bullywah for a minute. If you're getting a pile of bites, don't even worry about it. Don't change, don't adapt. Keep catching fish, especially if you're catching big ones. Oh, a fish just rolled, he's just out of reach. We'll get him when we get closer, you watch. He's about a cast length and a half out. Now, if you're not getting the bites that you expected to get, or if your body of water has a lot of people that throw frogs, it's time to be different. That is where, and these, I'm gonna link all the frogs down in the video description, but I wanna be specific. These frogs are going to be broken down there, so it's not complicated, because it's not like I'm holding them up here to tell you about each one. So I'm gonna list them very clearly so you can understand what I'm talking about. The frogs that really stand out from the crowd for me, like gavacho is one, but teckle makes a handful. They have 3 different frogs that all, there's one back in the junk. See if we can get him. They have 3 different frogs that are all very, very unique. The Sprinker is the famous one. The Sprinker is the one with that soft boot tail on it. Nope, he didn't pop up. I'm just casting back through the sparse reeds. He came up and rolled on something. The Sprinker is the one that everybody's aware of. But there's a couple others. There's the Honker and there's a third one. So the Sprinker has this soft tail, and you just chuck it and wind it. It's like a soft, weedless buzzbait. We've done a dedicated video on that. We've thrown it a ton. We've got a lot of fish on camera with you on that bait. It's very unique and it works. They have a second one that has like a big, in the picture, it looks like a big round, almost like a Colorado blade on the back of it, but it's not a Colorado blade. It's hollow. One just boiled out here. Totally open water, 40 feet off the cover. Come on, buddy. Come on. So this Colorado blade, or at least what looks like a Colorado blade, is hollow and it has rattles in it. So if you throw it out there and just kind of bump it, it's back there behind the frog. It's a normal frog body with this weird little silver thing behind it. But if you just bump it, it rattles. It sits there and makes a racket. You can still walk it. It's a little harder to walk than a normal frog because as you get into a consistent pattern, sometimes that blade will throw it off, but you can walk it. And then most importantly, you can just cast and retrieve it. So, I mean, any kid can throw it. Oh, you bugger. We got him to come up. Any kid can throw it. Anybody that can't walk a frog can throw it. You just throw it out, reel it back. It's a unique action because it's making a racket a lot like a Sprinker, but it's throwing a lot of flash because it's silver and it's got some rattle and some ruckus to it. Really different, really unique. And then they've got a third one that instead of having normal legs, it's got 2 blades. That's this one. Now this frog, I actually saw for the first time on a guide trip. I'm not gonna throw it for you right now. I'm gonna focus on the frogs because I haven't been able to get bit on this style right now here. But in general, I catch a lot of fish on it here. But that style, oh, there's one right there. The sun's starting to set and they're starting to get really active. It's a good thing I'm long-winded or we might not have got into these fish at all. Seriously though, those twin blades, first time I saw it was on a guide trip. I had a client bring it on the boat and he just flat caught him on that thing. I mean, he caught him. The fish were coming unglued for it in chocolate milk water. I'd been on a great frog bite. I had him frogging, but he wanted to throw this frog that he brought along. Sure enough, in that murky, murky water, they found those blades. You can walk it totally normally, and the perk is that when it's walking, sometimes the blades will touch, and you can hear it 30 or 40 feet out. You can hear those blades clacking. You better believe those fish can hear it. Very, very unique action. So the moral of the story, and there's 1 or 2 other really unique ones, and I'm gonna link you some options in the video description. But the moral of the story is don't be afraid to be different. If you're a guy that just goes out there and throws a frog on the mat, you are probably seeing success, and I'm not gonna tell you not to do that, but I do recommend that you try some open water fishing. Now, if you're a guy that just plain can't find success on the frog, you've got a bad hookup ratio, you struggle to get the hook in them, any of those problems, change your gear. And the nice thing is you might be changing back to some standard equipment that you've already got in the arsenal. You just need to put some braid on there and you'll be fine. And then number 3 is if your frog fishing is getting a little dull, or you think your fish are getting clued into the game, it's time to throw a different style frog. 3 simple tips that you can use this summer that will all make a big, big difference for you. Frogging is a riot. It really is. If you haven't done it, you need to try it. It's one of the highlights of my bass fishing every year. We catch some really, really nice fish. You may not get your biggest fish of the year doing it, but you will catch big ones, and you might get your biggest one of the year. But no matter what, you're gonna have a lot of fun. That tug of war with those fish, it is second to none. So get out there this summer, tie on a frog, get to chucking, have a blast, try some different baits. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. We'll talk to you soon.